Okay, good evening and welcome to the virtual meeting of the Recreation and Amenities Committee on this last day of June 2020, the worst year to ever exist. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I have just received apologies for absence from the Deputy Mayor Councillor Dave Eggleton. Are there any other apologies, Town Clerk? No. Okay, moving on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? I see none. So we move on to public participation. I believe we have one member of the public here to speak this evening. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Simon Loring and I live on Rod Eyot and I've lived there since 2011. It's my full-time residence. Shall I say my little bit about the moorings and everything?
Yes, go ahead.
You want to go in? Okay, it's very simple. I sent an email which has our comments on the mooring report that I read. And I just wanted to go through quickly just to say that we've sort of got a WhatsApp group now after COVID-19, and it's now most of the residential sort of riparian owners on the river that are adjacent to the park, including Wargrave Road. And everybody's been frustrated now, and it's been getting worse by these overstaying boaters. It's been getting worse for about 5 years. There's two issues. One is noise and the other is pollution. And these residential boats, unless they're plugged into power supplies, they make noise because they're high demand electric. They've got washing machines, all that kind of stuff on them, big tellies, and they are sitting there and basically getting cheap moorings when they should be in marinas paying £10,000, £12,000 a year. The pollution is when they run their engines, there's no emission regulations on boats, so they're as polluting as they can get. So it's like having big trucks outside your house, but you've taken all the catalytic converters off them. The other issue for the pollution is sewage in the river. That some of these boats have been sat there a long time, they never leave. We know that we don't see them taking off illicit toilets, so they're basically macerating sewage into the Thames. And it's difficult to prove, but in the old days, the EA used to come up and inspect. They used to put little stick seals on the sewage systems, but they don't do that anymore. They don't inspect, and everybody knows that, so there's no prosecution of that. The impact of these boats isn't only on the riparian owners and the other park users, it's impacting the other visitor boats. And I've been speaking to the Thames Visitor Mooring Organisation, and they don't like this either. There's been a lot of trouble with the visitor boats and the residential boats who won't turn off their generators and sit there pumping out fumes, into the other boats. At the moment, I know that a lot of them have left, but some are still there, and there needs to be a strategy for preventing them coming back. At the moment, there's an opportunity in that what I found out was that basically the boatyards are saying they've sold every boat on the river. So most of these are going to be visitors' boats. Most of the people are obeying the rules at the moment and not going out, not staying overnight. So it's quiet at the moment, but in a couple of weeks or in a week's time, it's going to get very busy with visitor boats, and that's going to carry on for some time because obviously people can't go abroad and everybody's been buying boats. So in theory, the visitor boats, which don't generally cause any trouble and tend to be self-policing, in other words, if one's annoying, the boat behind will go and tell them, and don't run generators generally because they're not there for long. There's an opportunity if you're going to change how you manage the moorings to a private company, you need to be certain that you're not missing that in terms of money, and that you're getting £33,000 at the moment, but it may be that it will just naturally double this year anyway, if you can keep the 400 metres of residential overstayers away and get the visitor boats in. I think that's pretty much really what I'd like to say. And I sent an email earlier to Kelly, so I don't know if she'll circulate that later with various other comments on. So that's it. I think that's my 2 minutes.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that, Simon. Simon did send an email earlier. I hope everyone's had a chance to read it. Some of these suggestions are actually really quite useful suggestions that when, obviously at this stage, we're going to discuss this under agenda item 8, but it will need to come back to this committee probably in September. And at that time, some of these suggestions might be quite useful. We might want to look at the way we allow generators on our land and such. So thank you for attending tonight, Simon. There any other members of the public? There aren't any, so we move on to the minutes to approve.
Sorry, excuse me. Who is Anne Tully?
Yes, another member of the public has joined, Anne Tully, who I believe is another resident of the island. I don't know whether she wishes to speak at all or whether or not she's just here to observe.
Okay, Miss Tully, would you like to speak, or you're currently muted? You'll need to unmute your microphone. You're okay. Okay, brilliant. We'll move on in that case.
Was that thumbs up? Sorry, excuse me. Was that thumbs? Oh no, she's gone. All right.
Oops, I kept myself muted as well. So moving on to the minutes of the Recreation and Amenities Committee held on the 19th of May. Are there any issues anyone wants to raise? Any corrections?
So move.
I see none. All in favour of passing those minutes? Thank you very much. We now move on to the progress report, which I will go through one by one once I get to the correct page. So Fairmile Chapel, as you can see, work is due to start in mid-July. If you raise your hand as I go down, and then I can stop and answer any questions at the time. CCTV at Makin's Recreation Ground. Donation of a Slovenian hay rack. The Eat Food Festival. You will, obviously on this agenda, it says here that this has been moved to Saturday, the 22nd of August. You may have seen on social media that this has now been cancelled for this year. However, the Eat Food Festival very much hopes to be back for 2021, and there are already discussions going on how this might take place. So, yeah, very sorry that we weren't able to have that event this year. Moving on to riverbank repairs, this report will obviously be brought to a later committee. Provisions of toilets at Makin's Recreation Ground was discussed quite heavily at the last meeting. Park service update. At this point, obviously, I should probably mention it's put on here. The 4th of July is a day when everyone is expecting everything to open and it be some sort of end of lockdown. However, we can only do that if we can do that safely. With areas such as the skate park, we can do this relatively safely. There are some posters from Skate England that we can use as temporary signage. We are going to have to look at some point into how we deal with this on a more long-term basis. But if we could just carry ourselves through the summer at this point. Obviously, with the skate park, it will mean removing the fencing, and it's an open space for people to be able to enjoy as long as they can behave responsibly. However, with the playgrounds where there is equipment, it is not just as simple as opening up. There needs to be procedures in place, staff in place, to enable these parks, these playgrounds to be opened safely. It may be that we are unable to open our playgrounds safely on Saturday the 4th, but I know that we would hope and are working very hard to open the playgrounds as soon as possible. If not the 4th, then shortly afterwards. Councillor Crook.
Yeah, if we can encourage people that are going to use the skate park, that they don't spit on the skate park, because that is a health and safety risk itself, and I have witnessed that. So if we could just not spit, because it's pretty disgusting anyway. So yeah,
No.
I'd like to add that.
Councillor Hooper.
Yeah, Kelly, yeah, I was asked today whether or not the nursery at the Lewisham Pavilion is going to be able to use the bowling green as they've been using as a bit of a playground.
I don't believe they were using the bowling green. I believe they were using...
Oh, sorry, the putting green.
That's it, the putting green.
Yeah.
I don't think the grass in the bowling green could withstand toddlers. I'll let Carl answer that question, then we'll come on to Councillor Plant.
Yeah, I believe they said they've used it before, so I don't
They
know.
have, yes.
Yeah. Okay, fine.
Can I come to you on that one, Carl? Is there any agreement in place?
Yeah, I mean, they're at the moment where it's not being used for putting. Diana from the nursery has, on occasion, used it with her group, school group. So that isn't too much of an issue.
Okay, Councillor Plant.
It's slightly off topic, but two things. Thinking of the no cycling signs, does anyone know who spray painted pictures of bikes all over the town centre? Like, have we found out that? Is number one.
Believe it was Extinction Rebellion.
Was it? Gotcha. And then number two, the no cycling on the towpath seems to be a large point of contention on the other side of the riverbank as well, with all the rowing coaches and bits like that, because one side is extensively used by all the coaches to coach juniors and rowing and all of this kind of stuff. Yeah. And then I've had numerous clients, one of whom claims he was pulled off his bike by a park warden complaining about cycling on this side and stuff like that. But knowing who the guy is who's complained, I believe him as far as I could throw him, unfortunately. But yeah, just it's a tough one on the cycling.
We are looking at possibly using some chalk spray. I don't know if that's the right terminology for it, is it, Carl? To perhaps have some direct signage on the pathway, temporary direct signage. What was it called, Carl? The spray stuff?
It's semi-temporary line marker. It's just basically what people would use to mark out roadworks. It's just a spray can. It's spray paint that will
wash away with time.
Yeah. And we will use stencils to make it look a little bit more uniform.
Okay, the other issue is obviously the toilets, but we have an agenda item on that, so I don't want to touch on that now. Are there any other questions or comments under Parks Update before we move down the progress report? I see none, so we move on. The Henley Litter Challenge, obviously I'm imagining there's not much of an update at the moment, Councillor Plant, but at the same time, I think now more than ever we might need something. I'm not sure if it perhaps sits better on one of the subcommittees, but as we're meeting less regularly, I'm not sure. What do you think, Councillor Plant?
The good stuff is that Julia Carey and co, we've got a good, so in part of the Make Henley Plastic Free, they kind of almost got rolled together a little bit. We've now got a pretty good Gmail document or Google document about everyone that wants to help. Part of those key people that we need for the Litter Challenge is schools coordinators. So we now have the right people to contact when schools get up and going again, and hopefully from September onwards. The goal was obviously probably to have it done by September or October this year so that it could be at the River and Rowing Museum. But it looks like it'll probably be a project that can start in autumn term this year, as long as our primary schools are back, and then look to then have it in the final display in the River and Rowing Museum when they're open and functioning again. So we have the right people in place. We just need to wait till kids can play together again and go from there.
Fair enough. I think it's a very different world. My daughter was able to go back to school yesterday for lunchtime social, but everything was disposable. Absolutely everything had to be disposable. And that's obviously not very plastic free. So we are going to have to find a new way of doing things, I think. Moving on to the signage working group. Sorry, Councillor Clark, you're muted, so you'll need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, the daily emptying of the bins, is that still being continued? There seems to be a lot of bins filled up with rubbish, and there's a lot of rubbish in Tons Lane in the big bins and also on the floor. Okay,
so that's an SODC matter, but I'm quite happy to give you a call after the meeting, or perhaps tomorrow morning, Councillor Clark, because seeing as I am a district councillor, I'm quite happy to discuss that further. I have had other inquiries about Tons Lane, but unfortunately that's not for this committee. The only bins on this committee are the bins on our parks, which are parks empty.
Okay. Thank you.
But I will give you a call in the morning about that.
Thank you.
Signage working group, as I say, there's a meeting at the end of next month. is ongoing. The Lido working group, Lido, however you prefer to say it, obviously, because like everything else, because of COVID, it's had a bit of a setback, but discussions have restarted, so we should get an update at the next meeting. The welcome wall is ongoing, and paving around the Leichlington Pavilion is obviously ongoing too. You can see that both the nursery and the Bowls Club have been contacted. Are there any comments or questions regarding the progress report before we move on to the budget? I see none, so we move on to the budget. I think it's obviously clear to see, and I think we're all fairly aware we were going to take a bit of a hit in the car parks and with moorings and such. It's the same as everywhere else, isn't it, really? Hopefully we will start to see an increase over the coming months as lockdown eases. Are there any questions or comments on the budget? Is everybody happy to progress?
Yeah, so moved.
Thank you very much. And that brings us actually nicely onto where we need some of this money. The Mill Meadows toilets. To open things, we need to open safely. To open things safely, we need to have more things in place, such as hand sanitizing stations, such as more regular cleans. As members will be aware, our cleaners, our toilets are cleaned by a contractor. They're not cleaned by Park Services, which is one saving grace. But all of this does have a cost. We have some unused money in the band budget. That's basically what we're asking to do via that money from the band budget, and use it to safely open our toilets as soon as possible. It should be noted that this will only really cover us until the end of September. So we really do need to think about, if we want to do anything more, where is that money going to come from? And also, we really need to think about how COVID-19 may have changed things actually forevermore. So things we might need in place more long term and more permanently. But at the moment, this would certainly cover us to open as safely as possible over the coming months. Councillor Plant.
Just on the Kings Road, Grace Road, obviously they've managed to stay open, but only because I do obviously work right next to one of them. They haven't changed anything. They haven't modified anything. It's the same cleaning state. It's not cleaned any more frequently, and nor have they provided any more facilities. There's no signage about queuing, and they're not operating a one in, one out. So how come I know that our responsibility is to be as safe as possible, but do we need to go through it all? Or is there leniency to just, when it's ready, open? They already have hand washing facilities, and hopefully it's the toilets so everyone's as clean as possible anyway. Because unless someone can correct me, I certainly know that the Grays Road car park has done nothing differently throughout the whole process.
Some might call Becky psychic, others might call her well prepared. Becky asked me that very question, and I went to John Backley of SODC and said, well, how can you manage to keep your toilets open? It seemed that they obviously looked at the guidance and looked within the government guidance to find a way to be able to keep the toilets open, and have tried to do so as safely as possible. But there was a big emphasis on the fact that they would hope that people were able to police themselves and guide themselves and be sensible when using the toilets, rather than doing anything in particular to keep them open. But I don't think that's quite as satisfactory for a town council. Councillor Crook.
Yeah, what I think would be a good idea moving forward, because it's going to have to pay for itself and we can't just magic up money, is if we, apologies, I can't read my writing actually, if we had an attendant that did like the one in, one out, or if we had a machine, because in Wales, some parts of Wales, they charge people 30 pence to go to the loo. So if we could charge people 30 pence, they could use contactless and that would pay for itself. Or even if we had, like, you know, the kiosk, if we reopened the kiosk but had it outside the kiosk selling items, had an attendant, then bring some revenue in, because it's going to have to pay for itself. and like maybe if it could have like a sensor then at the door, so that you were able to do like a 1 in, 1 out. So maybe you wouldn't need an attendant if we could have all that put together. It could pay for itself in the long term, and we kept it going, charging 30 pence. And I don't think that's a lot to ask for people if they're that desperate, and if they don't want to pay 30 pence, they can walk the 200 yards over to the train station or railway station, as someone should say, to use the loo that way. So I think that we should be charging them to pay for it, because it's
It's something that could certainly be investigated and brought back to brought back on the next report to see if it's valid. Councillor Arlett, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I think long term we could probably look into that, but I think short term we need to make a quick decision. And I would recommend items 4.1 B, C, and D. Obviously, A, I would say we reopen rather than close until the NALC advise. So A, that we reopen, and also B, C, and D. So I'd recommend that we take all those on board.
Can I just say, going to the NALC advice, this was written before the new guidelines came out.
Yeah.
So that is I don't think NALC is saying you should open on the 4th of July, but they're saying if you can open.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Town Clerk. If you can open safely, you should do so.
They advise that toilets should remain closed until the UK is COVID alert level 2. Now, actually, the wave of measures that are being brought in on 4th of July, the relaxations that are being brought in there, are broadly in line with what they would be expecting to do in level 2. So even though central government haven't said we're at level 2, the actions that they're taking would suggest level 2. That being the case, then it would seem reasonable to be looking to opening them around about the 4th of July, when the other facilities are going to hopefully be opened.
Okay. In that case, I'm happy to second your proposal, Councillor Arlett.
Okay, thank you.
All in favour of that? Is there anyone else that wants to speak? Sorry, first. No? Okay, all in favour? Thank you very much. That is passed. Now move on to agenda item 8, temporary moorings. We've heard already from a member of the public this evening on this item. The report is fairly self-explanatory. Are there any questions or comments or anything anyone wants to pick up in the report? Councillor Crook.
I just want to go back to what Mr. Loring was saying about people should be going into a marina. He himself lives on a boat, and it's obviously a cheaper way of living on a boat than living in a property, and that's probably why people live on boats, houseboats, and they probably can't afford to go into a marina, and we should be mindful of that. But I'm not really happy about them discharging into the Thames. They should go to a more suitable place. I'm sure there's facilities for them to discharge it properly. I think there is, isn't there?
There are up and down the river places you can dispose of certain things.
Bear in mind that some people afford to go to a marina. That's all I'd like to say.
Councillor Miller. You're muted.
Sorry, yeah. I think a lot of the boats that we have, some of them do take the biscuit a bit, staying a little bit longer than they should. The generators, I mean, I go down there quite a lot. I'm very much in favour of the penalty charge. I think that that you mentioned here in item 3.4 about a £200 penalty charge per night for non-compliance with terms and conditions. I think that's a very good idea, and something that hopefully might make people reconsider overstaying their time.
Absolutely. I think we've got an opportunity here, because what we're saying, I mean, if you look at 4.1, the recommendation, it's about inviting expressions of interest and getting those ideas in. And, people quite local to us, actually, there are local people that may have some fantastic ideas they want to bring forward. And I think it's something that we should also, you know, think outside of the box on. Councillor Plant, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you very much, Mr. Lauren, for his comments earlier. Difficult one, because obviously, you know, as a town council, we've discussed a lot how to increase and maximise revenue creation. Moorings are a brilliant way of creating revenue generation, and if we've got obviously boats using the moorings a lot, that is great on one hand. If they're using it for periods where other boats wouldn't necessarily be moored there, that's obviously fantastic. So part of me kind of thinks, yes, all the negatives of the charges and the waste and bits, you know, we need some way of policing that, but I'd hate to feel like we're deterring boats for staying and coming to visit, and then actually risk our revenue from it being decreased. So it's kind of, on one hand, you want the moorings to be as full as possible. If one way of having that is having boats for a longer time, I don't immediately see a problem with it, as long as they're adhering to the rules.
No, absolutely. And I think we also have the opportunity, obviously at this point, we're just inviting that information to come to us. We can then decide whether, what level of service we require or we'd like. Do we still want our park wardens to monitor, or do we want new people that come in as part of a contractor to monitor and walk up and down? I mean, we really get to choose the different levels. Moving on to Councillor Arlett.
Yes, Chairman. The recommendation is fine, but we're not going to resolve that this summer if we go along with that that recommendation. And if you go on to page 22, when you get to 1.6, checking mooring fees, I think really I would just leave this summer. I'm sorry, Town Clerk, but I would leave this with you to probably take it up with. We do have a person that does the car parking. We may wish to use him, but I think we just need to make this very simple. We don't want to make it complicated this year. There's enough information in 1.6 on page 22, which I think we could employ someone to do that. Or alternatively, we just carry on with the park staff. But I think we need to make it pretty simple over the next 3 months to go and keep checking these moorings, and then obviously follow on the recommendation if you wish to go down that track. I'm not sure it's the right way to go.
Okay, Town Clerk, if I could come to you before Councillor Plant.
Can I finish, please?
Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry, Councillor Arlett.
So, as I say, if we then choose to do that, and then probably look at the recommendation, but I'm not even sure the recommendation's right. I don't think is it really big enough to go on to Contracts Finder? I finished.
Muted.
And I muted myself, and now, yes, Sheridan, would you like to go?
Thank you very much. At the moment, the park staff do work incredibly hard to try and tackle the overstayers. I know that Carl and Becky are in weekly correspondence with overstayers, trying to get them to move. The difficulty that we have is that we don't really have the formal processes in place to be able to enforce it. And that's why we need a professional company to look at it. In theory, you can get any parking contractor would have, it's the same mechanisms as they would use for a private car park. And we have, I think, sought expressions of interest from local parking enforcement people as well. The main reason for putting on Contracts Finder is not necessarily for the value of the contract, but is actually to make sure that we get enough, we get a good broad range of tenders coming back, so that we're advertising it as fully as possible, so we get the right contractor on board. That's really the message. But certainly in the meantime, I do know the parks are working very hard to try and tackle it, and I know that they come up against a brick wall so many times.
Absolutely agree. Councillor Plant.
I was going to say, yeah, I agree with what Councillor Arlett was saying and Sheridan there. But again, it's like this year, leave as is. You know, I personally think Parks, Carl and the guys are doing a good job at it. And again, if we go back to revenue, you know, bringing in 33,500 last year, fantastic. I'd hate to see a parking enforcement or similar country take a massive chunk of that revenue and line their own pocket with it rather than throw it into our much needed coffers right now. It's one of those things, if we can do it in-house and we have the provision to do it in-house over the coming years, if we can set out the right signage to make clear how it can and cannot be utilised and the consequences for not doing so, I'd rather, again, I hate to be the stickler, I hate to say it again, but I'd just rather keep as much revenue in our pockets rather than anyone else's.
I think it's a lot like the car parking. We used to do the car parking, but we're chasing them up, and then all of a sudden your numbers are increasing. The money that you're not getting in because they're just not paying it, and they know they can get away with it because we can't enforce it. So it's a case of our parks can still monitor and can still ticket and so on, but when it gets to that level of needing that enforcement, somebody else takes it on and they take a percentage of that. That's money that we weren't going to get anyway. So we get a chunk of that. So actually, it's not that they're taking our money. Yeah, they're going to take some of it, but they're going to be giving us some of our money that we're owed as well. So that's certainly one point to consider. Councillor Lambert, have you got your hand up there?
Yeah, I was just wondering how big this problem is, and I was just sort of looking through the report to see if I missed anything. I mean, do we have an idea of what percentage of people are simply refusing to pay and know that they don't have to pay because we can't enforce? I mean, how big is the problem?
Well, I can think of one person that's definitely doing it right now.
One.
Yeah, but that's just right now, today, the last few weeks.
Is there always one person doing it at any given time?
Pretty much, is that right, Carl? One or two? There's certainly some regulars.
Yeah, there has been I mean, I don't know what is going on. As Mr. Loring says, over the past few years, there has certainly there are more people living on boats, and we do get our fair share of them. And you do have the odd. I wouldn't say it's an enormous problem, but it does take a huge amount of council resources. It takes us quite a bit of resource to chase up on overstayers. Time that could be spent better used in the parks. It's not, I mean, 2s and 3s at a time.
It's also unsafe. I mean, I've actually seen our former town clerk physically assaulted by a man over not paying his moorings and not wanting to pay his mooring fees.
Yeah.
So you know, it's been a problem for some time. Councillor Arlott.
You know what? I forgot what I was going to say. I'll come back in a minute.
Okay. Councillor Clark. Oh,
I know what I was going to say. In days gone by, I don't know we used to go to the environmental agency, I believe, and just give them the boat number.
Yeah.
And then they could take some action. What's happened with that now?
I can answer that one.
okay.
We still do use that process, but due to I don't know if they've lack of resources their end, they're a little bit slower at getting back to us at the moment. Obviously, they've got a huge job of opening the rivers back up, and I think their time is limited.
Don't mention COVID as an excuse, please.
No,
We had that a few times.
The Environment Agency are consistently and below par. That was the nicest way I could say that. Councillor Clark, did you want to say something? You're muted. You're muted.
Boy, good.
Don't worry, I prefer it that way.
Yeah.
Councillor Clark, you're muted. There we are.
Now?
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you. Yeah, couldn't these people that want to live on a boat in a permanent position, couldn't they get charged a certain fee for the whole year?
I think it'd be opening a can of worms. It's against our boat policy as well. Town Clerk.
To have residential moorings would require planning permission, which we don't have, and I don't think the council would probably find it desirable to change all of its moorings to permanent moorings. They would probably wish to have at least some as temporary moorings.
Councillor Clark, is that your hand up? Yeah. Crook, sorry, Councillor Crook.
No, I think there is a law that they're not allowed to stay in a permanent place for so long because they do have to move along, don't they? there is some sort of law, so it wouldn't be completely permanent. I wouldn't be in favour of permanent moorings anyway.
I don't know.
I think that's our regulation, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, as the town clerk says, we don't have planning permission for permanent moorings. Town clerk.
Yes, there's no. I did ask the EA for clarification over exactly how long temporary is, and they really couldn't say. It's and planning as well said they really couldn't say. It was a case on a case by case basis. I think that if you were there for 364 days and moved for 1 day, I think that would still be classed as permanent. It's a tough one, really, but there's no legal definition.
Okay, so the recommendation 4.1 was to place an entry on Contracts Finder inviting expressions of interest to basically information gathering really on how we can take this forward. I think we do need more information on this, and I think we should be looking into how we can enforce these people that are not sticking to our boat use policy, our moorings user policy, and are overstaying their welcome. And I do think that there are some other things that we should be taking into consideration, like the possible stopping of generators after a certain time and so on. And I do think that should come back to another committee. So I'm quite happy to propose from the chair 4.1. If I have a seconder.
I'll second that, Kelly. I think we should at least investigate this.
Okay. Would anyone else like to speak to that before we go to the vote? Councillor Lambert.
That wouldn't be a commitment to actually do something, would it? Just to investigate the costs?
No, it's not a commitment to actually go ahead, because anything would need to be brought back to this committee anyway. It would cost money.
Yeah, good. Okay,
Finance
great.
don't like that either. They don't like it when things cost money.
None of us should. We have a budget problem.
Okay, all of those in favour of the recommendation 4.1? That's carried. Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item 9, tree planting around 40-acre field. There is a report, pages 23 to 25. Is there anybody that would like to speak to this? Councillor Lambert?
I've seen the holes left by many of the felled trees, and I think replacing them is perfectly sensible.
Okay, there was something I needed to point out, and I'm fairly certain it was that D, G and A are not council-owned sites. I don't know if I wrote the right letters down.
It's not clear to me from that map which those sites are.
I think that's why I was meant to point it out.
Right, okay.
D, E and J, because they're in different colours. D, E and J are in like a reddish colour, and F, G and H are in orange. Maybe one means ours and one means the others.
Yes, also I don't know if there is an A. So okay, so obviously you can see the recommendation again, 4.1. We love a 4.1 recommendation on this committee, clearly. The town council approved the proposal above of volunteer tree planting and the donation of trees planting shown at D, E, J and K on the plan below around 40 acre. I'm sure you can all read the rest of the recommendation. I'm going to, Lawrence, are you about to propose that?
Yeah.
Wonderful. I shall second your proposal. All in favour? Wonderful. Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item 10, the proposed footpath widening at 40 acre field, which is on page 27 of your agenda. So I think obviously it's a very good report, and the recommendation is quite clear. There is a lot going on at the moment. We don't have the funding to be spending willy-nilly, I think, as somebody referred to before, and we quite simply don't have the staff time either to really take on another huge project. But if anyone in the committee would like to help fill out grant applications, that would be fantastic. Councillor Lambert.
Actually, agree with those comments. My one concern about the scheme is the cost, really. It just is a lot of money at the wrong time, but I don't think the scheme should get lost. And the proposals in 4.2a about the SODC capital grant and other sources of funding, I think is well worth exploring. I hear what you say about the staff costs, but at the same time, I wouldn't like this sort of lost forever. That long, straight, very narrow, awkward footpath is pretty substandard, actually. And I think sorting it out, widening it, and making it akin to the Peppered Lane bridleway is a very, very good idea. But obviously, the cost of that is substantial. I did have one or two things I wanted to clear. There was mention of a substantial hedge, and I wasn't quite clear on where it was proposed to put that hedge. The one thing I wouldn't want to do is to block off the hillside of that footpath. You can't actually see the hill and the rabbits and the wildlife. That's actually the nice part about that walk, is that open hill on the side. So I wouldn't want to see that lost to a large hedge. I see it as a recommendation based on existing standards, but I do question barbed wire, the barbed wire string 3.4D. Personally speaking, I just don't like to see barbed wire when I'm out and about walking in the hills and the countryside. I think it's not very helpful, a bit outdated, and it looks a bit hostile, to be honest, and generally speaking causes most damage to people who innocently brush against it, though I do recognise the barbed wire is on the grass side of the fence. And that was really all I wanted to say, other than the memorial woodland is so overgrown at the moment. The bench is buried, so I don't know how we can get that sorted out.
I've seen that. There's been actually a huge volume of traffic around that way, particularly over lockdown. I myself have done the walk several times.
It would be lovely to see that footpath widened and done properly. It's very boggy, muddy and narrow in the winter. It's horrendous. So it would be great to see it fixed one day, but I think now is just not the time.
I mean, for you, Councillor Lambert, I'd be willing to suffer seeing it on the progress report and getting frustrated every single time we did the agenda. Certainly, so we didn't lose track of it. But with the pavilion, the works around the pavilion and the riverbank works and everything else we've got ongoing, this obviously will have to wait. But I take your points completely and agree, Councillor Miller.
No, I just want to underline, I think what you guys have all said, it's a huge amount of money that, and I think this has all come at very much the wrong time. I like the path myself. I like the rural character of it, and but I can understand, that for anybody with mobility problems, it's difficult to get along. But I would echo what Councillor Lambert has said, and let's not bury this. Let's just keep it in the back burner and perhaps revisit it at a later stage, a later date. But right now, I think, as you say, there are other things we need to crack on with.
I mean, from what you're both saying, it's pretty much the recommendation 4.3. Are you proposing and seconding?
Hang on a minute. Yes. Oh, hang on.
We just flick to that.
To acknowledge the benefits of the project in improving access in the area, although also recognising the resulting costs and work required would be considerable.
Yes, exactly.
Therefore, the widening of the footpath to be progressed only once funding is forthcoming and grants to be researched.
I will propose 4.3.
Okay. Are you seconding that, Councillor Lambert? Brilliant. Yep. All of those in favour of that recommendation proposal? Wonderful, that's carried. Thank you very much. We now move on to electric vehicle charging points at Mill Meadows, and you'll see, as well as the report, I think obviously they've suggested doing investigating by the pavilion. We'd also like by the piazza and by the River and Rome Museum also considered, because whilst we're not going to lose any spaces as such, although 3 spaces is turned into 2 with charging. I'd like to see more evidence as to why it would need to be in a prime parking location, and why near the Piazza or near the River and Row Museum, simply because if you're driving an electric vehicle and you're going to a car park to charge your electric vehicle, you're probably going to be willing to drive to the end of the car park anyway, and back to look for it. There's more on the report, but before I take questions and comments, I would like to welcome Deputy Town Clerk Kath Adams to the committee.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that, as you all know, the Climate Emergency Working Group was set up last summer following the Council's decision to acknowledge the climate emergency, which has subsequently been translated into a declaration of the climate emergency. And this is just one of the various strands of projects that the Climate Emergency Working Group is carrying forward. There are solar panels being installed on houses in Henley currently. There's tree planting, which ties in with a couple of the previous, or with the previous item. There are retrofit schemes for energy efficient measures, and the group has created a community action group to progress putting solar panels on industrial and commercial buildings around Henley, and they're actively seeking buildings to do that currently. The electric vehicle charging they were looking to introduce on-street electric vehicle charging, which would be really useful for people who haven't got off-street parking, but that's been put on hold because Oxfordshire County Council are carrying out an electric vehicle charging strategy for the whole of the county at the moment, and we don't think that'll be coming through till next year. But there is this opportunity to install or look into installing electric vehicle charging points. And all this is asking the committee to consider is just doing a site survey. It's not committing the council to anything at this point. But this scheme could be used. There's a fully funded scheme where there would be no cost to the council whatsoever, but it would be a sign that the council's keen to progress its declaration of the climate emergency. It promotes its air quality aims, and would be a real benefit to visitors. There is also the opportunity of an income stream to the council via this as well. So the motion here is just to go ahead with a no obligation survey at Mill Meadows, and we could add the extra locations on.
Okay, would it definitely come back to this committee? I mean, obviously I know that myself, Councillor Crook and Councillor Arlett are on the Climate Change Committee, attend when we can. But at the same time, anything regarding Mill Meadows, I feel should come before this committee to be considered, certainly the minute detail. Councillor Lambert, did you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Firstly, I welcome the fact that there'll be no cost to Henley Town Council. That means we can carry on talking. Also, on the subject of the electric car parking spaces being sort of prime locations, I actually think that's a very positive thing, and I think that should help shape general policy in the future when we increase the number of electric charging points in town, is to target those prime locations that are closest to the shops, second only to the disabled spaces, closest to the park, so that people frequently see them and they see that there's an incentive there to get an electric vehicle, and they see electric charge points all over the place, and it helps them think it's viable, and I hope it will help incentivize a general move to EV within the town, and that benefits everybody.
I completely agree with that, actually. Yeah. Any Councillor Plant, is that your hand up?
Well, yeah, I was going to say what Glenn was going to say about they need to be central, and actually we just need to change people's attitudes to how they travel into our town centre over the next decade. But otherwise, it seems, as Kath was saying, very straightforward, and we should recommend 4.1 and get these survey and the considerations done.
Also, Kath, if you can answer this, if they are paying for the electricity that they use while they're in the spot, are they also paying for the car parking space?
I think that's up to the town council to decide how they want to play it. I think some places you pay to charge, but you don't pay for the space. But other places you can pay for the space. It's entirely up to us, I think. Okay,
Councillor Crook.
Kath, the charging point in the Kings Road car park, right? Do they pay to charge? Do they pay to park there? And How is that operated? Do they pay for the electric there? How is that operated?
The electric's free.
The electric's free. About the parking, they still have to pay to park there to charge, do they? Does anyone know for definite?
Pretty sure, yeah.
I don't know.
Councillor Clark has his hand up.
I'm fairly sure, because that's why a lot of people park there at the weekend on Sunday, so they can charge for free.
Sorry, Councillor Clark. You're
And he's on
muted
mute.
again.
Can we have a fine jar if you talk on mute? You have to,
Yeah.
when you go back to the mayor's parlour, you will get that.
Electric.
Can I talk now?
Yes, you can.
Thank you very much. I'm looking on the form here. It says Graves Road car park, two EV charging points. Now there is 7 points there where the disabled parking bays are. You could put 7 charging points there and put the disabled parking either side of the town hall, like they used to do in the old days. So that would give you an extra 7.
Councillor Clark, I hate to interrupt you, but again, this is something I can discuss in our phone call tomorrow morning as SODC, but it's not for this committee, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
So DC.
Yeah. Are there any other questions or comments, or does anyone want to make a proposal? Obviously, we've got the recommendation in front of us. Councillor Plant.
I propose that we do go with 4.1 as written.
And is that you? Oh, loads of seconders there. Councillor Lambert, did you want to speak to this? You're muted.
Where do I pay the fine? I wouldn't mind making a small amendment just to say that the use of prime parking spots for these should actually be policy if we can.
Okay. Are you happy to accept that, Lawrence?
Yeah.
Councillor Plant, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. All of those in favour of this recommendation? That's carried. Thank you very much. We now move on to the part where we normally ask the press and the public to leave, but in this case, we'll just stop being live on YouTube.